The people who leave without making a sound are usually the ones who were carrying everything. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall struck 5, its deep chime rolling through the silent mansion before dawn. Outside, a light autumn mist drifted across the perfectly trimmed lawns, softening the outline of the sprawling Walker estate. Inside, Claire Bennett stood alone in the marble foyer, wearing the same navy housekeeping uniform she had worn almost every morning for the past 3 years. She looked at the front door for several long seconds before carefully removing the small silver name tag pinned to her chest. She placed it beside a neatly folded envelope on the antique entry table. No dramatic farewell. No angry speech. No demand for recognition. Just a handwritten note with one simple sentence. "Thank you for allowing me to serve your family." She rested her fingertips on the envelope for a brief moment, as though saying goodbye to more than a job. Then she picked up her worn leather bag and quietly reached for the brass doorknob. Behind her, the mansion remained asleep. The fireplaces were cold. The grand piano in the living room waited in perfect silence. Even the kitchen, where Claire usually prepared coffee before sunrise, remained dark for the first time in years. She had memorized every creaking floorboard, every family preference, every forgotten anniversary, every medicine schedule, every gardener's birthday, every light switch that needed an extra push. None of it had ever been written into her contract. She simply believed that caring for a home meant caring for the people inside it, even if no one noticed. She turned the handle slowly. "If you walk out that door today," a calm voice echoed from behind her, "you'll never know the promise I was about to make." Claire froze. She closed her eyes before turning around. Nathan Walker stood halfway down the staircase, dressed in a charcoal sweater instead of one of his tailored business suits. His hair was slightly unkempt, as though he had slept very little. For the first time since Claire had met him, he looked less like one of America's most respected billionaires and more like an exhausted son carrying invisible weight. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Nathan's eyes drifted toward the folded envelope on the table. "You were going to disappear," he said quietly. Claire offered the smallest nod. "I didn't think my leaving needed to interrupt anyone's morning." There was no bitterness in her voice. No accusation. Just the gentle honesty that had always made her different. Nathan descended the last few steps, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the marble floor. He stopped several feet away, careful not to invade the invisible distance she had placed between them. 3 years. More than 1,000 mornings. Yet he suddenly realized he knew almost nothing about the woman standing in front of him. He knew where every board meeting would take him for the next 6 months. He knew the quarterly performance of every company he owned. But he didn't know Claire's favorite color. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know what dream she had quietly buried to spend her days making someone else's life easier. The realization settled heavily inside him. Claire reached for the doorknob again, her expression calm but resolved. "Mr. Walker," she said softly, "some goodbyes are kinder when they're quiet." Nathan looked at the envelope one more time before lifting his eyes to hers. For the first time in years, he understood that what was about to leave his house was never simply the maid. Claire lowered her hand from the doorknob, but did not step back into the house. The first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the tall windows, painting long golden lines across the polished marble floor she had spent countless mornings cleaning before anyone else was awake. Nathan remained where he was, neither moving closer nor asking her to stay again. Somehow he sensed that one more command would only push her farther away. Claire had always responded to kindness more than authority. She glanced toward the dining room, where fresh flowers stood in crystal vases. She had replaced them every Monday for 3 years without anyone reminding her. In the library, every book sat perfectly aligned because she quietly returned them after members of the family forgot where they belonged. The grandfather clock had never stopped because she remembered to wind it every Friday afternoon, even though no one had ever assigned that task to her. There were hundreds of little things hidden inside the rhythm of the mansion. They had become invisible simply because Claire never allowed them to become problems. Nathan looked around the entrance hall as though seeing it for the first time. Everything appeared effortless. Everything appeared permanent. He suddenly wondered how much of that effortless perfection had actually been one quiet woman refusing to let anyone feel inconvenience. "When were you planning to leave?" he asked. Claire answered with the same calm honesty she always carried. About 10 minutes ago. Nathan looked at the envelope resting on the table. You really thought no one would notice? A faint smile touched her face before disappearing again. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow either. Homes like this have a way of hiding small absences at first. She was not trying to hurt him. She was simply telling the truth. Wealth had a strange way of covering cracks until they became impossible to ignore. Nathan remembered the first winter after his father suffered a stroke. Every medical appointment had somehow been scheduled on time. Every prescription had appeared exactly when it was needed. Every meal had matched the doctor's recommendations. He had assumed his executive assistant coordinated everything. Now he realized Claire had quietly managed details that nobody else had even seen. His chest tightened with an unfamiliar feeling. Regret. Why did you never ask for anything? He asked. Claire looked toward the large staircase. Because this was work, Mr. Walker. Honest work. I never wanted gratitude to become part of the paycheck. The words settled heavily between them. Nathan had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions with less difficulty than this conversation. Numbers always made sense. People rarely did. Claire finally picked up her bag again. It was old, its leather softened by years of careful use. Nathan noticed the handle had been repaired by hand instead of replaced. It struck him that he had spent more on a business lunch the previous week than Claire had probably spent on herself in months. Yet she had never complained, never hinted, never expected anyone to notice. The silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. It carried years of overlooked moments. Nathan's eyes drifted toward the kitchen hallway. In less than an hour, the household would wake expecting fresh coffee, warm breakfast, pressed newspapers, and everything else to appear as though by magic. For the first time, he understood that magic always had a name. It had simply never been spoken aloud. Nathan slowly reached for the envelope, but did not open it. Somehow it felt too personal, as though unfolding the paper before Claire allowed him would cross a line he had only just realized existed. Instead, he placed it back exactly where she had left it. I owe you more than a conversation, he said quietly. Claire shook her head with gentle certainty. You do not owe me anything. You paid me fairly. You treated me professionally. Sometimes that is enough. Nathan wanted to believe her, but something inside him refused. For years he had built a reputation as a man who noticed details before anyone else. Investors admired his instincts. Competitors feared his preparation. Entire companies trusted his ability to recognize value where others saw ordinary assets. Yet somehow he had walked past extraordinary character every single morning without ever seeing it. The irony was impossible to ignore. A faint sound drifted down the hallway. One of the upstairs bedroom doors had opened. Soon the house would begin its familiar routine. Coffee cups would be expected on the breakfast table. Newspapers would appear beside each chair. Fresh fruit would already be washed and arranged. It had always happened so naturally that no one questioned it. Nathan looked toward the kitchen and realized he had never once asked himself who woke before sunrise to make every morning feel effortless. Claire noticed the direction of his gaze. Mrs. Dalton prefers chamomile tea before breakfast on Tuesdays, she said softly. Your father usually wakes around 6:15 if the weather is cool. His sweater is folded over the chair in the sunroom. The landscapers are coming at 8. I already left instructions for the roses on the east garden because they bloom better if they are trimmed this week instead of next. Nathan stared at her in disbelief. She was leaving, yet she was still thinking about everyone else. Every sentence was another reminder that she had quietly memorized the heartbeat of the entire estate. You planned all of that even after deciding to resign? He asked. Claire nodded. People should not have difficult mornings because I made a personal decision. The answer lingered in the air like the first light spreading across the windows. Nathan suddenly remembered a winter storm nearly 2 years earlier when every road leading to the estate had been covered with ice. Flights had been canceled across the region. Offices had closed. Somehow breakfast had still been waiting exactly on time. He had assumed the kitchen staff stayed overnight. Later he learned every employee except Claire had been unable to reach the property. She had walked nearly 4 miles through freezing temperatures before sunrise because she knew his elderly father became anxious whenever routines changed. She had never mentioned it afterward. She had simply served breakfast with the same quiet smile. Nathan had thanked the chef that morning, not her. The memory settled like a stone in his chest. Claire adjusted the strap of her old leather bag and glanced once more toward the staircase. Your father is stronger than he believes, she said. He only needs someone to remind him of that every day. Nathan frowned slightly. He talks to you about things he never tells me, does not he? Claire hesitated before answering. Sometimes people speak more honestly to those they believe will never repeat their words. Nathan lowered his eyes. That single sentence revealed more about his own family than any boardroom consultant ever could. For years he had protected the people he loved by providing everything money could buy. Claire had protected them by offering something far rarer. She had simply listened. Claire drew a slow breath before looking at Nathan one last time. There is one more thing I should tell you before I go, she said. The binder on your office desk is organized by next week's meetings instead of this week's. Nathan blinked in confusion. Why would you prepare next week if you plan to leave today? Claire answered with the same quiet expression. Because responsibilities should not end simply because employment does. She offered a faint smile. You always say that successful people prepare farther ahead than everyone else. I thought the house should do the same. Nathan almost laughed at the unexpected irony. Those words had come from one of his leadership speeches years earlier. He barely remembered saying them. Claire had remembered every word. A soft shuffle echoed from the second floor. His father, Richard Walker, appeared at the top of the staircase wearing the familiar gray cardigan Claire had mentioned only minutes before. The elderly man paused, surprised to see both of them standing in the foyer so early. Claire, he called warmly. You are up before the sun again. She smiled with genuine affection. Good morning, Mr. Walker. Richard slowly descended the stairs, one careful step at a time. Did the coffee machine finally give up on us? He joked. Claire gently shook her head. No, sir. Everything is ready in the kitchen. Your breakfast will be waiting exactly the way you like it. Richard looked from Claire to his son and sensed the unusual silence between them. What is going on? Nathan hesitated. Before he could answer, Claire spoke first. Today is my last day. Richard stopped moving. His gentle smile faded into quiet disbelief. Your last day? Claire nodded politely. I wanted to leave before everyone woke up. I thought it would be easier. The older man's eyes filled with sadness, not dramatic, only deeply sincere. Who is going to remind me that I forget my reading glasses every afternoon? Claire laughed softly. They are in the left drawer beside your favorite chair. I placed a small note inside so you will remember. Richard frowned. And who will argue with the florist every Thursday because they always bring lilies instead of white roses? I already called her yesterday, Claire replied. She promised she will not make that mistake again. Nathan remained silent as the conversation unfolded. For years he had believed Claire simply completed assigned tasks. Now he was witnessing something entirely different. She had quietly woven herself into the daily lives of everyone in the house. Not through grand gestures, but through hundreds of thoughtful moments nobody had noticed until they imagined living without them. Richard finally reached the last step and looked directly at his son. Nathan, surely you are not letting her leave like this. Nathan answered honestly. I only found out a few minutes ago. Richard turned back toward Claire. May I ask why? Claire lowered her eyes briefly before meeting his gaze again. Because sometimes life asks us to care for someone in another place. She did not mention hospital appointments. She did not mention unpaid bills. She did not mention her mother's worsening health. Those burdens belonged to her, and she had never believed kindness should be exchanged for sympathy. Richard slowly nodded, respecting the boundary she had quietly drawn. Nathan noticed something that unsettled him even more than her resignation. Claire never once tried to make herself the center of the moment. Even now, as she prepared to walk away from the only home she had known for years, her greatest concern was making sure everyone else would be all right. Richard reached out and gently placed a hand over Claire's folded resignation letter without opening it. A house remembers the people who care for it, he said softly, even when the people living inside forget to say thank you. Claire's eyes shimmered for the briefest moment, but she quickly composed herself. You have already thanked me more times than necessary, Mr. Walker. The older man smiled sadly. That only proves I should have done it even more. A silence settled over the foyer before the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. The estate manager, Helen Brooks, entered carrying her tablet, ready to begin the day's schedule. She stopped immediately when she noticed Claire holding her travel bag. What is going on, she asked. Nathan answered quietly. Claire is leaving. Helen stared at Claire in complete disbelief. Today? Claire nodded. Everything for the next 2 weeks has already been organized. Every vendor has updated instructions. Every maintenance appointment has been confirmed. Every pantry inventory is finished. You will find color-coded notes inside the office cabinet. Helen blinked several times before speaking again. You finished next week's inventory already? Last Thursday, Claire replied with her familiar calm smile. Helen slowly lowered her tablet. She had supervised dozens of employees during her career, but none had ever prepared for departure by making everyone else's future easier. Nathan watched Helen's expression change from surprise to quiet admiration. There is something else, Helen said after a long pause. The charity gala this Saturday. I thought you were coordinating the floral deliveries. Claire reached into her bag and removed a slim notebook. Every page contained neat handwriting, delivery times, seating diagrams, contact numbers, and handwritten reminders. Small colored tabs marked each section. Everything is inside, Claire explained. The blue pages are vendors. The green pages are dietary requests. The yellow pages are emergency contacts in case someone cancels. Helen carefully accepted the notebook as though it were something priceless. When did you have time to prepare all of this? Claire answered honestly. Usually after everyone went to bed. Nathan looked at the notebook and then at Claire. He suddenly remembered countless evenings when he had worked late in his study. More than once he had noticed a light still glowing beneath the kitchen door after midnight. He had assumed someone forgot to switch it off. Now he realized Claire had often stayed long after her shift ended, quietly organizing details that would prevent tomorrow's problems before they existed. Nobody had asked her to do it. Nobody had even known. Richard looked toward his son with gentle disappointment. Nathan, do you remember your mother's favorite saying? Nathan frowned, searching his memory. Richard answered for him. The strongest foundation in any home is usually the person nobody applauds. The word struck Nathan harder than any business lesson he had ever learned. His gaze drifted across the entrance hall. The polished floors, the fresh flowers, the spotless windows catching the early morning light. For years he had admired the beauty of the house, without ever wondering whose quiet hands had protected it day after day. Claire adjusted the strap on her old leather bag once more. She had prepared every schedule, every room, every detail for everyone except herself. Her own future remained uncertain, yet she had left certainty behind for everyone else. Standing there in the soft morning light, Nathan realized that replacing an employee might be possible. Replacing the quiet heart that had held an entire household together without asking for recognition might be impossible. Claire took one final look around the foyer, memorizing the familiar morning light reflecting across the marble floor. She had already accepted that some chapters ended quietly. She reached for the door once more, but Nathan spoke before she could turn the handle. Please give me 10 minutes. She looked back with gentle confusion. 10 minutes will not change why I have to leave. Nathan nodded slowly. Maybe not, but they might change what I understand before you do. Without waiting for an answer, he walked quickly toward his home office. Richard watched his son disappear down the hallway, then smiled softly at Claire. That is the fastest I have seen him move without a business emergency. Claire could not help smiling in return. Several minutes passed in complete silence. Helen quietly excused herself, sensing that the moment belonged to the Walker family and the woman who had quietly become part of it. The house slowly awakened around them. Somewhere upstairs, a shower began running. A radio played softly in the kitchen. Birds gathered outside the breakfast room windows. Life continued exactly as Claire had prepared it to continue. Then Nathan returned carrying a thick black binder. It was the household operations file that every estate manager used. He placed it carefully on the entry table and opened the first page. His expression changed almost immediately. Every section contained handwritten notes that were not part of the official manual. Small reminders filled the margins. Mr. Walker Sr. sleeps better if the curtains are opened before 7. The cook worries when nobody compliments her blueberry muffins. The gardener hides fresh mint behind the greenhouse because Mrs. Walker loved the scent every spring. Replace the batteries in the guest room smoke detectors every October, even if they still work. Nathan slowly turned another page. Another. Then another. The binder was no longer an operations manual. It was a quiet history of kindness. None of those details increased efficiency. None affected profits. Yet every note made the house feel more human. Richard leaned closer and smiled sadly. Your mother used to notice things exactly like this. Nathan swallowed hard, but continued reading. Tucked inside one section was a folded receipt from a local hardware store. He unfolded it carefully. It showed payment for replacement parts for the old greenhouse heater 6 months earlier. The receipt was made out to Claire Bennett. Nathan frowned. Why would you buy this? Claire answered simply. The heater stopped working during the cold spell. The replacement part was inexpensive, and the flowers would not have survived another night without it. Nathan looked at the date. He remembered approving a landscaping budget that same week. Why did you not submit the receipt? Claire shrugged gently. It was only $38. Filing reimbursement paperwork would have taken longer than fixing the problem. Nathan stared at the paper in disbelief. Then another folded receipt slipped from the binder. Then another. Small purchases. Replacement light bulbs. Garden twine. Bird seed for the feeders Richard enjoyed watching every morning. Medicine organizers for Richard after his eyesight began fading. None of them had ever appeared on the estate expense reports. Claire had quietly paid for them herself because solving the problem had mattered more than recovering the money. Nathan slowly closed the binder. For years, he had measured value with balance sheets, quarterly reports, and investment returns. Standing in the quiet foyer, holding a collection of handwritten notes and forgotten receipts, he realized he had just discovered the most valuable investment anyone had ever made in his family. It had never appeared on a single financial statement because it had been built one unnoticed act of kindness at a time. The receipt slipped gently from Nathan's hand onto the polished table, but his eyes never left Claire. For the first time in years, he did not see an employee standing in front of him. He saw a woman who had quietly protected his family with a devotion that no contract could ever require. Why? He asked, his voice softer than anyone in the room had ever heard it. Why would you do all of this without telling anyone? Claire looked down at the old leather bag resting beside her feet. Because if I had told someone, it would have become about me instead of the problem that needed to be solved. Nathan closed the binder and drew a slow breath. Every board meeting he had ever attended rewarded people for presenting solutions. Claire had spent 3 years solving problems before they ever reached another person, then quietly disappearing before anyone knew they had existed. He realized that true leadership had been standing only a few feet away every morning, wearing a simple housekeeping uniform. Richard gently smiled. Your mother once told me that character is what people do when they know nobody will ever applaud them. Nathan looked toward his father's face. I finally understand what she meant. Claire remained silent. She had never worked for praise, and receiving it now seemed to make her almost uncomfortable. Nathan slowly stepped closer, careful to leave enough space for her to feel respected. Claire, he said, earlier I told you that if you left today, you would never know the promise I was about to make. She met his eyes with calm curiosity. I remember. He shook his head. I was wrong. She waited quietly. It was never supposed to be a promise to convince you to stay. He paused, searching for words that felt honest enough. It was supposed to be my first attempt to become the kind of employer who actually notices. The people standing beside him. Claire lowered her eyes for a moment. That is kind of you to say. Nathan gently shook his head again. No, it is overdue. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded document, then placed it beside the binder without opening it. I spent most of last night reviewing our family foundation. We have scholarships, medical grants, community housing programs, and employee assistance funds. Claire listened without speaking. This morning I realized something embarrassing. He gave a quiet, self-conscious smile. I built programs to help thousands of strangers while failing to ask whether someone under my own roof needed help first. Richard slowly nodded in agreement. The realization settled heavily over the room. Nathan looked directly at Claire. I still do not know why you have to leave. You have every right to keep that private. I will not ask you to explain. Claire's shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. It was the first time anyone had respected her silence instead of trying to pull answers from it. But I want to make you one promise, Nathan continued. Not as your employer, not as a billionaire, simply as someone who finally understands what he almost lost. He gently slid the folded document back into his pocket without showing it to her. Before you walk out of this house, I would like you to give me one opportunity to help without asking for anything in return. Not your loyalty, not your gratitude, not another day of work. Just one opportunity to repay a fraction of the kindness you have quietly given my family for 3 years. Claire stood completely still. The morning sunlight reached across the foyer and illuminated the folded name tag she had left behind. For the first time since she had decided to leave, uncertainty entered her heart, not because of money, but because someone had finally spoken to her with the respect she had never once asked to receive. Claire looked at Nathan for a long moment before speaking. "You have already done something important," she said quietly. "You noticed." Nathan gave a faint smile, but there was sadness behind it. "Not soon enough." She slowly shook her head. "People cannot change yesterday. They can only choose what they become tomorrow." Richard watched the exchange with silent pride. It reminded him of conversations his late wife used to have, simple words carrying far more weight than long speeches. Nathan reached into his jacket once more and carefully unfolded the document he had hidden moments earlier. Instead of handing it to Claire immediately, he placed it on the entry table beside the silver name tag she had removed. "This is not an employment contract," he said. "It is not a retention bonus. It is not a promotion." Claire remained still. "Then what is it?" Nathan answered without hesitation. "It is a commitment." She looked down at the paper but did not touch it. Nathan continued, his voice calm and sincere. "Last month our family foundation approved a new medical assistance program for caregivers across the state. The program has not been announced publicly yet. This morning, I added one more policy before coming downstairs." Claire slowly lifted her eyes. "Any employee or former employee facing a serious family medical hardship will receive immediate support without needing to repay it. No publicity, no conditions, no obligation to continue working for us." Claire stared at him in quiet surprise. Nathan gently pushed the document a little closer. "You told us nothing about your reasons for leaving, and I respect that. But I have spent enough years making decisions to recognize when someone is carrying a burden alone." Claire remained silent. Nathan did not ask questions. He simply waited. After several moments, she finally whispered, "My mother needs surgery." Richard closed his eyes for a brief second, as though the answer confirmed something he had already feared. Claire continued carefully. "The waiting list became shorter than expected. They called yesterday afternoon. The procedure is in 4 days." Nathan listened without interrupting. "She lives almost 3 hours away. She has nobody else. I cannot ask someone to care for her while I continue caring for this house." Her voice never trembled. She spoke with quiet dignity, explaining facts instead of seeking sympathy. Nathan nodded slowly. "Then you should be with her." Claire looked surprised by the answer. He smiled gently. "Family should never have to compete with work." He pointed toward the document resting on the table. "Your mother's surgery will be covered by the foundation. Transportation, recovery care, anything she needs. You will not owe us a single dollar." Claire instinctively took one small step backward. "I cannot accept charity." Nathan immediately shook his head. "Neither could I." The answer caught her attention. "That is why this is not charity," he continued. "It is recognition. You have already given more to this family than we ever realized. Allowing us to stand beside you now is not repayment. It is responsibility." Richard smiled warmly. Sometimes accepting kindness is another way of giving someone the chance to become better. Claire lowered her eyes toward the folded document. For years she had protected her dignity by refusing to ask anyone for help. Now, standing in the soft morning light, she realized Nathan was offering something entirely different. He was not trying to rescue her. He was trying to honor the quiet strength she had carried alone for far too long. Claire slowly reached toward the document, but instead of opening it, she placed her hand gently over it as though feeling the weight of the decision rather than the paper itself. After a long silence, she smiled with quiet gratitude. "I will accept this," she said softly, "not because I need someone to save me, but because you have offered it with respect instead of pity." Nathan nodded once. That answer meant more to him than any contract he had ever signed. "Then we understand each other," he replied. Richard stepped forward and gently embraced Claire. It was not the embrace of an employer saying goodbye to an employee. It was the embrace of a father thanking someone who had quietly stood beside his family when they had not even realized they needed her. "Take care of your mother," he whispered. "And when she is well again, visit us as our friend." Claire smiled through grateful eyes. "I would like that very much." A week later, the Walker estate felt strangely different. Breakfast still arrived on time because the staff followed Claire's careful notes, but everyone noticed something missing that no checklist could replace. Richard still sat beside the same window every morning. Yet now he often looked toward the hallway expecting to hear Claire's familiar greeting. Helen continued using the color-coded notebook, amazed that every page seemed to solve a problem before it appeared. Nathan found himself pausing each morning beside the grandfather clock in the foyer. The silver name tag was gone, but he had left the small handwritten resignation letter inside the household binder. Not as a reminder of someone leaving, but as a reminder of someone who had quietly changed the meaning of leadership inside his home. 3 months later, the Walker Foundation publicly announced its new caregiver support initiative. The program provided confidential financial assistance and family medical support for employees and former employees facing serious hardships. During the press conference, reporters asked Nathan what had inspired such an unusual policy. He smiled, but did not mention Claire's name. "Sometimes," he answered, "the greatest lessons are taught by people whose names never appear on office doors." Far away, in a quiet town, nearly 3 hours from the estate, Claire folded the newspaper after reading the announcement. Her mother had recovered well from surgery and was beginning to walk through the garden again each afternoon. Claire never told her that one unexpected conversation in a quiet foyer had made that recovery possible. Some kindnesses did not need to be explained to become meaningful. Early one Saturday morning, a familiar black sedan stopped outside her mother's small white house. Nathan stepped out carrying a simple basket filled with fresh white roses from the Walker greenhouse. Richard followed, smiling warmly beneath the autumn sunlight. There were no photographers, no assistants, no business proposals, just two people keeping a promise made with sincerity. Claire opened the front door, surprised but genuinely happy to see them. Richard laughed softly. "I believe someone once told us that homes should always welcome the people who care for them." Claire stepped aside with a warm smile. "Then please come in." As laughter quietly filled the small living room, Nathan looked around and realized something remarkable. The house was modest. The furniture was old. The walls carried family photographs instead of expensive artwork. Yet the same feeling of peace he had admired inside his mansion existed here as well. At last he understood why. It had never been the size of the house that created a home. It had always been the quiet heart of the person who cared for everyone inside it. And from that day forward, whenever Nathan Walker spoke about success, he no longer measured it by the wealth a person accumulated. He measured it by the number of lives made gentler through simple acts of unnoticed kindness, because the quietest people often leave the deepest legacy.